Be seated. Some of you will recall that one of the items featured in my letter of appointment here was to focus on stewardship. And I was on the way to writing what I think anyway, I hope anyway, would be a good stewardship sermon based on the gospel today. But I couldn't get it done yesterday because I couldn't get past that first reading. I told you, and I mentioned it again this morning, that we were going to hear over the course of the summer two different trajectories, two different notions of kingship, of power. And we get that today, two kings, two notions of power. Two notions of what society is and how it should function. We start with David, loved by God, favored by God, anointed in his childhood to be king over Israel. A man who, whether we agree with all of his techniques or not, clearly had brought glory to Israel, had established it in a secure place, had claimed the city of Jerusalem for themselves, Zion. Historically, he's viewed as the quintessential faithful shepherd, the iconic king. However, even this favored king proves the warning made early by Samuel. We've heard it a month and a half ago, maybe, when the people were clamoring, desiring a king. We want to be like the other nations. We want a king. The vision had been that God would be their king. They didn't need another king, but they wanted a king. And Samuel warned them, if you have a king, he'll make your sons soldiers, your daughters to be confectionaries. He'll take your vineyards and your fields. David, secure in power, grasps even more. You heard the scene described. It's the springtime. It's the time when the kings go off to war. But you'll notice David didn't go off anywhere. He was at home, lounging around on the couch, drinking his mint juleps in the afternoon. He's up on the roof. Houses in the Middle East, still to this day, many of them have roofs where they become an extension of the house, especially in the warmer weather. People can sleep up there in the nights. It's cooler sometimes. And if you have some sort of covering, you can sit up there in the day. And so David's had his little afternoon nap. And he gets up and he surveys the land around him. I don't know if this day was atypical or typical. I don't know whether David, who had a clear view of all the houses and the rooftops and even some of the courtyards where people wouldn't see what was going on from the street, he's got his binoculars out and he spots this hot woman. Oh, good-looking girl. She's bathing. And he wants to know who she is. This man who has 6 wives already, a number of concubines, but this one takes his fancy. Who is she? Well, it's Bathsheba, he's told. She's the wife of Uriah. He's one of your soldiers that's out fighting in the field where, well, they don't say this, where you're supposed to be. Well, tell her I want to see her up at the palace. I don't know what she was feeling or thinking when she got the invitation. I don't know if she was flattered, scared. I don't know whether she agreed to what happened or not. She really had no choice, though, either way. I don't know what you heard in Bible studies and sermons growing up, but I remember hearing sermons that painted her as something of a temptress. She's no such thing. She's bathing in private. But David can see her. And the king summons her. If you've paid attention to the news at any point over the last 5 decades, you can guess where this is going. It's a typical kind of thing that happens with people in power. They abuse it. And he does. He calls her up. She comes up. He lays with her. We know what that means. She goes back home. I'm not a Hebrew scholar, but I think the translation is generous when it says she's purifying herself after her period. I don't know that that's the case. I've known people who have been sexually abused who bathe and shower, trying to clean themselves up. That's what's happening here. It's in our Bible. Don't mean to trigger anybody, but that's what we heard this morning. Abuse of power. His claim to power is secure. He gladly, though, takes hold of it and he exercises it for his own ends. That's not typical behavior of David, but he does do that. And then he finds out that she's pregnant. And this is where the scandal begins, because now he engages in a cover-up. He says, bring Uriah back from the field. We'll send him down. We'll get him liquored up. Candy is dandy, they say, but liquor is quicker. They get him liquored up, and they're going to send him home to sleep with Bathsheba so that he can say, Uriah got her pregnant. But Uriah is too faithful to his buddies in the field. So he does not. He does dine with the king, but then he sleeps with the palace guards. He will not go down to his house. And so finally he is sent back. Cover up. Again, if you followed the news at all in the last 5 or 6 decades, this is typical. Cover up. Sends him home. Sends him back to the field, And he gives instructions that Uriah is to be put in the middle of some intense fighting and the army's to back off. I don't know what you call that. I call that murder. You've probably all know of a man named Oliver Cromwell. He was the chief aide to King Henry VIII. He fixed everything for the king. He fixed the church as it departed from Rome. He fixed the dissolution of the monasteries so that Henry could have this land in cash grab. He managed the coming and going of Henry's first 4 wives. He was the son of a lowly blacksmith, but he rose to great power and wealth. And of Oliver Cromwell, Hilary Mattel writes, somewhere or nowhere, perhaps, there is a society ruled by philosophers. They have clean hands and pure hearts. But even in the metropolis of light, there are middens, dunghills, and manure heaps swarming with flies. And even in the republic of virtue, you need a man who will shovel up all the stuff. And somewhere it is written, Cromwell is his name. Cromwell was a great shoveler, if you know history, and there was lots to shovel in Henry's reign. And characteristically, powerful leaders need shovelers because typically they produce lots of stuff that needs to be dispensed with. And Joab is that for David. He puts Uriah just where David tells him, and he rescues David, it seems. How y'all feeling right now? Came to church for an uplifting sermon, and not so much so far. But thankfully, we're given a glimpse of another king. It does not cover over what I've just described, but it does present an alternative. And that one is Jesus. It's Passover. You could argue Jesus is in the wrong place. David's supposed to be in the field, he's in Jerusalem. It's Passover. You could argue Jesus should be in Jerusalem because it's Passover, but he's out in the wilderness. But he's out there for a reason. His project is to reconstitute the chosen people. And so they're engaged in a new Exodus. There are echoes of Exodus and Moses all through chapter 6 of John. It's part of this reestablishment of a chosen people that are once again going to lift up God as their king. And as they're there, people are experiencing liberation and healing. Something is different about this man, and it draws crowds. And here they are in the wilderness, and it's getting late, and they have not eaten. And so Jesus, again moved with compassion, says to Philip, where are we going to get them some food? Tim Hortons is everywhere, but not quite everywhere. There's no drive-through here. What are we going to do? He already knows what he's going to do. He tests Philip, not testing him in the sense of trying to trip him up, but he wants to take the temperature of where Philip is in his faith at this point. And Philip says, like the church often can say, we don't have enough. We can't feed anymore. We can't do more than we're doing now. We don't have enough. Even if we were to take the collection for the next 6 months, we couldn't feed all these people. Andrew also has some doubts, but he's kind of expectant as well. He says, well, we've got this little bit here. Can that make a difference? And Jesus has them sit down. And like Moses in the wilderness, who provided manna for the people, Jesus provides the new manna, not just enough for the day, but more than enough. And people eat. The Greek is much better than just saying satisfied. They're full. They're ready for a nap. They've ate to the full. And there are 12 baskets left over. It's a different kind of economics than we're used to. But Jesus is a different kind of king. I remember, it goes back a ways now, you might remember too the television media. Some of you won't remember this because you're not old enough, but some of you are. And John Paul II, when he went to Scotland in 1982, I was still in my undergrad. I remember one of the passages of Scripture that the Holy Father talked about with the young people was today's reading from John 6. He pointed out how Andrew, Scotland's patron, was conscious of the inadequate amount of food for feeding the crowd. But he put what he had in the hands of Jesus, and Jesus blessed it and fed the 5,000 with it. And then the Holy Father said to the young people this. He said, "It is exactly the same with your lives. You feel conscious of your inadequacy. But I say to you this, place your lives in the hands of Jesus. He will accept you and bless you beyond your greatest expectations." I remember that because I was a young man at the time. And there's still days, even now, perhaps even more now, where I feel inadequate. But I trust Jesus can make whatever I have to give adequate and even more. How about you, St. Luke's? Not about me, about you. Now, I've talked about two kings and two orientations to the world, and in case some of you are sitting there thinking, well, that was a nice rant about David and a nice attempt at saving the rant through Jesus, this does matter to us because it's about our orientation to the world as well. How do we see the world, and what are we going to demand of the people who we put in charge of things? And how are we going to live with whatever power we have been given? David, even with his devotion to God, feels the need to grasp, which leaves some with much and others with not enough. Is that what we believe in? That we seek our own satisfaction and security and survival above all else? Or do we come down on the side of Jesus, the one who kneels to serve, who washes feet, The Jesus who will not be enticed by the trappings of earthly power and the popular acclaim of the masses. He has one focus and one focus alone, and that is God and God's kingdom. With so little, God can do so much, and yet so much of our lives is we're afraid of not having enough, of not being enough, and we grasp for all we can get. But with Jesus, there is always an abundance of wine. With Jesus, there is always an abundance of bread. With Jesus, there is an abundance of healing and wholeness. With Jesus is the abundance of the divine presence. So how shall we live as church? How shall we be in the world? How shall we vote? How shall we act? How shall we be in the world? Shall we long for the days when we were central as Christians and scream and moan when we are hated or mocked or ignored? I've seen lots of that this week because of the Olympic. I didn't see the opening ceremonies, but apparently there was this scene that resembled the Last Supper, people dressed in drag. And I've seen all sorts of Christians posting online, so upset about it. I'm not saying you can't be upset about that. But is that the main thing we should be concerned about, that we're being mocked? If that's what was happening? I'm not sure it was. Or shall the redeemed live like their Redeemer? Not with hands grasping, but with hands outstretched to receive and then to bless. To take the body and then to be the body. That's the choice that lies before you when you come to the table this day.